The legend and life of Nancy Ann Connard Curley, better known as Nance Dude, is mostly remembered because of the horrific crime of leaving her granddaughter to die in a cave in Haywood County in 1913. Haywood County is west of Asheville, North Carolina. Over time, she became a real-life boogeyman, so much so that parents would use her story to encourage children to behave, or Nance Dude would come and get them. Here's the story. On a very cold day in February in 1913, Nance Dude was seen walking with 2.5-year-old Bonnie Roberta Ann Putnam. Nance was on her way to Tennessee to find little Roberta another home, and this is why. A man named Will Putnam had proposed to Nance's daughter Lizzie, but there was one sinister stipulation. Little Roberta could no longer live with them. Will did not accept Roberta as his daughter, even though he started sleeping with Lizzie soon after she and Nance moved in with Will and his family because Nance was struggling financially and she couldn't afford shelter. Lizzie was actually in love with another man, so Will believed Roberta was that man's child. He refused to marry Lizzie as long as Roberta lived with them, even after Lizzie became pregnant with their second child. Nance was actually sleeping on the floor next to them, so she heard everything. As I said, Nance was tasked with finding another home for Roberta, so she told everyone that she was going to Tennessee to find someone who could take better care of her. The trip should have taken a few days as long as they didn't encounter any bad weather. She passed through Jonathan Valley toward Utah Mountain overlooking Maggie Valley, but when she returned home the same day, she gave different accounts of Roberta's whereabouts. After a few weeks without any sign of Roberta, all three of them were taken to jail and Lizzie gave birth to Will's son while in jail. She and Will were later released and they were married. Nance had left little Roberta in a shallow cave on Utah Mountain that she knew from her own childhood, and she blocked the entrance with rocks. In April of 1913, search parties combed through the area for days before a dog led them to a small cave. Inside, they found Roberta's decaying body covered in 6 layers of dresses. She had starved to death. Nance's lawyer said that because she and her family were so poor and desperate that she believed that her own survival as well as Lizzie's depended on the sacrifice of little Roberta. They would share 1 can of peaches between 6 of them, and they would cut up 1 squirrel and split it amongst themselves. Will would always take the largest portion. The judge decided to move the trial to Bryson City in Swain County because an angry mob was planning on lynching her. When asked if she had committed the crime, she responded, "I am as innocent as you are." She eventually pled guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 30 years in the Women's Division of Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina in 1914. She was paroled after 15 years when she was 80. She went to Lizzie's home hoping that she could stay with her, but Lizzie made her leave. So she ended up living alone in a cabin for 25 years on Connolly's Creek near Bryson City, and she made a living selling kindling and firewood. Stray dogs kept her company until she died in 1952 when she was 104 years old. She actually dropped dead while she was chopping wood to sell to tourists. There was speculation that it was Lizzie, not Nance, that put Roberta in the cave, and some believed that Nance was just too frail at 65 years old to have lifted the stones that seal the cave, and that she was an accomplice in the murder. The cave, which is on private property, still draws visitors, and Roberta's grave is in Delwood Cemetery. Floyd Collins had a dream that he was trapped in rock and that angels had come down to take him away. He told his stepmother 3 weeks prior to exploring Sand Cave near Cave City in Kentucky that he had before him 2 days of the most dangerous cave exploring he had ever attempted. She urged him not to go, but he didn't heed her warning. William Floyd Collins, better known as Floyd Collins, was born in 1887, and he began exploring Kentucky's caves alone when he was 6. When he was 12, he had memorized every nook and cranny of the Great Salt Cave. Down there, he even saw dead bodies of other cavers. As a teenager, he would squeeze through cracks that made other cavers cringe, and he gained a reputation as being Kentucky's best caver. He had even taught himself how to play church hymns on the stalactites like a xylophone. Back then, poor families would look for caves on their property that might attract paying visitors. So in 1917, he discovered a beautiful underground canyon that had sheer vertical walls. It had a ceiling that was as smooth as plaster, and a flower garden of white, orange, and brown gypsum formations. He named it Crystal Cave, and he began promoting it to tourists. Other cave owners would sabotage any potential success by telling tourists that Crystal Cave was closed. They would even block the road with boulders and wagons. 5 men demanded that Floyd hand over the lease to the cave, and when he said no, they beat him bloody. His brother Homer had to chase them off with a shotgun. On January the 30th in 1925, around 10 in the morning, Floyd became trapped by a fallen rock while exploring Sand Cave. He was looking for undiscovered cabins and a new entrance to Mammoth Cave. 15 feet within the cave came the first squeeze, and with his arms against his body, he exhaled deeply to flatten his chest and pushed his body forward with his toes. On the other side, the cave widened and then it tightened again. So he eased down feet first and he carefully moved through the crack. Then the cave went black because his lantern had died, and having sight in that amount of darkness is useless. As he was trying to hurry back to the surface, that's when he dislodged a 26-pound rock that fell from the cave ceiling and pinned his left foot, causing it to throb with pain. His left arm was pinned under his torso, and his right arm was by the rock ceiling. He couldn't reach behind or in front, and he couldn't roll over. It was like he was in a straitjacket. The more he struggled to free himself, the more the rock would dig into his foot, and the more other rocks would fall and pack him in. He would claw at the cave walls until his fingers were bloody. When neighbors realized that Floyd hadn't been home for over 24 hours, they went to look for him. Because the cave passageways were so tight, a 17-year-old boy was the only one that was able to crawl back far enough to communicate with Floyd. He then notified Floyd's family, and they brought him food and water. His brother Homer and dozens of others attempted to free Floyd, but most of the men, besides Homer, who attempted to maneuver through the cave, came out pale because of exhaustion and fear. Homer did everything that he could to get his brother out. He removed rocks for hours and hours. Men would go into the cave with food and supplies, and they would return saying that Floyd was in good spirits. He was wrapped in a blanket and he had eaten everything they brought. But they were all lying. These so-called tough men were rightfully afraid of being stuck themselves. At this point, Floyd was cold, shaking, numb, and he went through periods of both incoherence and lucidity. News began to spread and things became even more chaotic. Floyd became the top news story in the country. The National Guard had to come and assist with crowd control. Families were having picnics. Snake oil salesmen scammed people with their miracle potions, and moonshiners peddled white lightning. The area had taken on a disrespectful carnival-like atmosphere with food, entertainment, and alcohol. The day became known as Carnival Sunday. Around 10,000 people came to the cave hoping to see rescuers pull Floyd out. Only 690 people lived in that town. Also at the surface, men were drinking moonshine and they were arguing about how to free Floyd. They argued about TNT and cave-ins, gas torches and gas poisoning, amputation and blood loss. This is an excerpt from the book Trapped, the story of Floyd Collins. A problem immediately confronted Homer that frustrated every subsequent rescuer. If a person came into the chute head first, he was forced to work upside down and was compelled upon leaving to push himself feet first up the sharp slant and then backpedal 20 feet more before he could turn around. If he dropped in feet first, as Homer had just done, he couldn't bring the upper part of his body down to Floyd's level without contorting himself into almost impossible positions. A 21-year-old journalist, William B. Skeets Miller, was sent to cover the story, and when dismissed by Homer because of his age, he removed his suit, put on coveralls, and grabbed a flashlight. He pictured being suffocated under the rocks, but once he spent time with Floyd, he was determined to free him. He tried to ask Floyd some questions, but he was incoherent. So Skeets just took some mental notes, and then he went back to the surface, which took him about 30 minutes. 73 hours later, Floyd said he saw angels and he smelled freshly cooked liver and onions, fresh cow's milk, and warm chicken sandwiches. He was hallucinating. A firefighter thought that Floyd could be freed by rope, but it was possible that his foot would be pulled off. Floyd said, "Pull my foot off, but get me out." Others were worried that the sharp rocks that lined the cave walls might fillet his body. A doctor in the crowd said that a rope pull would stretch Floyd's internal organs like taffy. At hour 79, a special body harness was brought to the cave, and Homer, Skeets, and the firefighter went into the cave with a 100-foot rope. To calm Floyd's nerves, he gave him ham sandwiches, coffee, and whiskey, which relaxed him, and he confessed that he didn't actually want to lose his foot. Homer also gave Floyd a sedative that could help him tolerate the shock if they did indeed pull his foot off. Because Floyd was in a horizontal position with his lower body encased by rocks and gravel, his back was in the shape of the letter L, and it was extremely painful when they pulled him, and he screamed for them to stop. The men were so distraught at this point that one of them fainted and the other two had to be carried away. At hour 88, a caving buddy of Floyd's arrived and attempted to free him. Floyd knew that if anyone could free him, it would be his friend. But his friend was too large to reach beyond Floyd's knees. But he was able to remove a 500-pound rock. After multiple attempts and 122 hours later, Floyd began to sob. On February the 4th, the tunnel collapsed and Floyd was no longer reachable. Another rescue shaft was immediately started, but when they finally got to him, it was February the 17th, and he was dead. It took 2 months to get his body out, so a funeral was held at the cave. He was buried on the Crystal Cave grounds. A choir sang "Nearer My God to Thee," which is the same song that Floyd would play on his stalactite xylophone. In 1927, Crystal Cave was sold to Dr. Harry Thomas, and he decided to dig up Floyd and fix up his embalming and place him in a glass-topped coffin as a tourist attraction. In 1929, grave robbers stole Floyd's body and attempted to throw him into the Green River, but his body became tangled in a bush. Dr. Thomas recovered his remains and locked a chain around the coffin. After Floyd died, Congress authorized a prior motion to convert Mammoth Cave into a national park. Floyd's final resting place is in the Mammoth Cave Baptist Church Cemetery, and William Skeets Miller was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for his reporting.